Hello and good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you back. I know we took a little hiatus from our Talking Tech webinar series. I know some of you on this series today joined us for our security summit, which was the reasoning for our slight hiatus in October of this. But we're back at it again here in November. And I know many of you sat in the SASE, ZTNA, SD-WAN seminar at our security summit. I have with me today Sarah Ernst from AVANT Communications. She is one of my go-to experts on all things SASE. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe give yourself a little bit of background?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am Sarah Arnstein, SASE sales engineer at AVANT Communications. I work with Chris pretty closely on a lot of SASE opportunities. I always say that half my job is staying up to date on the vendors in this space, whether that's hour-long trainings multiple times per week or day or 2-day long deep dives when we actually fly out and meet with these vendors. So I have a very good knowledge on the vendors in this space. And then the other half of my job is getting on calls and webinars like we're on right now to do education in this space, talk to potential clients about their SASE needs and what they can use in that space moving forward. So I'm a wealth of knowledge and I'm happy to share any of that I can today.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, with that, let's kind of get into it. So, we talk about SASE and, that is an acronym, Secure Access Service Edge. Do you want to talk about a little bit about like what SASE means as far as you feel, and kind of maybe let's talk about what came out of SASE. I know, SASE ultimately was kind of made up by Gartner to kind of encompass security and SD-WAN. So maybe we can talk about what the concept of SASE is.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the shortest way possible to describe it, I always say SASE is the convergence of network and security, most notably SD-WAN and network security. And these two solutions, the network side and the security side, are not new, right? They've been around for years and years. We saw, SD-WAN become very popular around 2010 and even later into that. And then around 2019, that's kind of when Gartner coined the term SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, if anyone didn't recognize that acronym there. And what we saw then, obviously, in 2020 was everyone kind of jumping to a remote or a hybrid workforce. So I think that is a big reason why SASE took off like it did, because it just kind of hit the market at a really ideal point for what this technology is, because we'll get into some of the use cases later on, but remote users is a big one. So the convergence of network and security, there are a list of features that Gartner has determined must be included in SASE solutions. And then there's a broader list of features that can be included in SASE solutions. But my biggest takeaway from this slide when I present it is usually that it's not a point solution in and of itself. It's more of a concept or a framework. So we always have to have the conversation of what does your environment actually look like and what are your goals moving forward, because every single situation is a little bit different. So it could require a different SASE solution to make whatever you're doing the most efficient and secure way possible.
Yeah, and maybe we could dive into that statement, that last little bit of a statement there, just a little bit deeper. So, what I see is people may think, much like ZTNA, they feel like SASE is this type of like big box product. Like I go buy it and I have SASE. But, really you can have a whole plethora of applications all strung together to make a SASE environment. You can have a single solution that is made up of those same products that are a SASE environment. I think it really comes down to, management and things like that. And, there's a vendor page later on in the slide, and maybe we can talk about some of those vendors and kind of some of the differences in how that might work out with some of those vendors. The things that I'm thinking about off of the top of the head would be like Cato. It's a full solution. It's got everything in there. Whereas maybe like Ariaka still doesn't really handle the security. You bolt that security on with another vendor that runs on their hardware as an overlay.
Yeah, and I think if we take it back to 2019, in my eyes, this solution was kind of built around Cato's product, right? They were kind of the first ones to do POP-based SD-WAN paired with cloud-based security. And then it kind of seemed like once Gartner coined the term SASE, that other solutions out there were either acquiring or building their own feature set to meet what Cato had. And we still see that today, right? We're seeing Ariaka build out their security suite, but they're still integrating with Checkpoint and Palo Alto and Zscaler. So yeah, it does kind of depend on the scenario, right? We're seeing a lot of people wanting that one platform for everything, like a Cato, to where they have one portal to manage everything, that they have one point of contact if they need help with anything, and it's just easier to manage all together. But then we also see scenarios where, we have a completely separate network and security team, and they don't talk to each other, much less agree with each other on platforms. So obviously they want something that integrates with each other, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the same platform. So we're seeing a myriad of desires out there in the market, but yeah, it does get very flexible and very convoluted when you get into that. So that's why we always request having a conversation before, choosing a solution.
Yeah. And I think it's also very interesting. So you mentioned kind of that POP-based model, more based around the Catos and the Ariakas in the world. I also think it's really interesting that some organizations have taken what historically, and we'll go through these models later on in the presentation, so that everybody on the call kind of has an understanding of what we're talking about when we say edge-based and POP-based model. But I think it's also very interesting to me that some people have taken that edge-based solution, the classic, whether that's built off of Fortinet or potentially Velo or Versa. And some of the vendors, not like Versa as a vendor, but maybe like Lumen as a vendor, has taken that and made that into a POP-based solution by leveraging their backbone to turn that into what would now be considered more like a POP style solution than an edge style solution.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch providers do that over the years. I think one of the first ones that I came across was Masergy, right, which is now part of Comcast. They built out their own POP-based Fortinet solution. I want to say before SASE was even a coined term. It's been around for a while, and vendors have started to do that as well. Like you said, with Fortinet, Versa, Velo Cloud is a big one that they've done that with on the SD-WAN side specifically. But yeah, it's definitely opened up a new marketplace for clients to have that POP-based solution without being pigeonholed into a couple different SD-WAN platforms.
And I think it's also interesting, especially on that edge side model, it seems to be some of those kind of, I would say, more bigger household names, those classic names that you think of, especially in the security or firewall types community. So like you had said, Forta, Velo Cloud, that's a really big name for classic SD-WAN, Versa as well. It's interesting that that's what they've used to kind of build their platform, is these classic household style names.
Yeah, and that was probably by design, right? There are companies out there that are very ingrained in the Fortinet suite, and so they want that moving forward, but they needed more than just the edge-based solution, and I bet there was some strategy there.
So, I mean, we talked about it a little bit. We touched on the way that integrates with Gartner. So this next slide here is kind of market analysis of what's going on in the market. And, has this Gartner report from June of 2024, so fairly recent, showing some of these providers as where they sit in the leaders, challengers, quadrants, the niche players of the world.
Yeah, so this was an interesting read for me. And if anyone is interested, I actually have a blog called Get SASE with Sarah. If you Google that phrase, it'll come up. And I did a full review and analysis of the Gartner Magic Quadrant from earlier this year. So that'll be probably the most recent post on there right now. But last year, we saw Palo Alto as the only leader in this space, which was surprising to me because, like I mentioned earlier, these solutions were kind of built around the Cato framework and what they were doing. So I was just surprised not to see them as a leader, but now they're in there. And I think that has to do with them bringing some more security functionality back to the edge. When last year's Gartner Magic Quadrant came out, they were solely using the POP-based security, and their device was simply an SD-WAN device to get you to the cloud. And then that's where the security functionality was sitting. But now they've kind of taken a step back and they have more security at the edge options. Yeah, we also see, I believe Cloudflare is a new one this year as well. They're pretty up and coming. I wouldn't even say up and coming at this point. They're pretty established, and they have a very robust security solution. They're a little lighter on the SD-WAN side, but if you've got, mainly remote users and your main concern is them securely connecting in and the security portion of it, then Cloudflare can be a good option as well. But yeah, we have access to most of these players on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and it's kind of interesting to see, them shift year after year, because this is only the second one.
Yeah, so we talked about the SASE as a solution being made up of a handful of different components and the concept of how it can either be a single vendor. So let's kind of, in the next slide, let's dig into those components around SASE and maybe touch a little bit on both the WAN edge services side, so like that classic kind of SD-WAN, TCP acceleration type thing, and then the network security services side of things.
Yeah, so this is a more comprehensive list of features that can be included with SASE. They don't necessarily have to be. I believe the four that Gartner has said have to be included are SD-WAN on the WAN side, and then on the security side, Secure Web Gateway, ZTNA, and CASB. So there's first three on the security side. But for the WAN edge services side, this one is primarily SD-WAN. That's usually the one we're getting asked to include the most. WAN optimization we're seeing every once in a while, but with the adoption of SD-WAN, I don't think we're not getting requests for it nearly as much, but basically the ability to optimize applications. If certain apps are running slower or you're having issues accessing them, WAN app can help with that. Content delivery network is only offered by a handful of providers in our portfolio. It's not something that we get into very often, but again, it can be included. So we wanted to add it onto this list. Basically, if you host a website, that can help users connect into it and have the best experience that they possibly can, right? If it's hosted in the US, but they're accessing it from Germany, that can cause some latency issues. But with content delivery network, you're kind of dispersing those resources out globally. And so then there might be a local German version of your website for them to access. Then bandwidth aggregation and network management oftentimes are lumped together, where a vendor who offers SASE and management around that SASE solution might also offer circuit aggregation. So you could have one provider, one managed service provider to send your bill to each month, one bill to pay each month, one point of contact if you ever need anything. So that can just be really nice for organizations that are kind of stretched thin in the IT department right now. And then network management, similar. Most of the bandwidth aggregators can also manage the network. That basically just means opening trouble tickets with carriers, managing the carriers from that side, so you don't have to deal with AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, et cetera, directly.
Yeah, and
then,
I was going to say, to kind of piggyback off of that, not necessarily something that's a component of SASE, but we've also seen as an offshoot of this bandwidth aggregation, network management, and then the SASE component as well. We've seen an offshoot of vendors that a lot of them like to refer to themselves as the next generation of like managed network service providers or things along that nature, and they will manage both the SASE environment. So I think operating that like as a service, firewall as a service, management as a service, and also offer the bandwidth and the network management. So now anything related to your internal or external edge-based network is all handled by a single source, less finger pointing.
Yeah, and what we see sometimes too is that obviously aggregators have to make money somehow, so their circuit pricing might be a little bit more expensive than if you were to go to the carriers directly. So sometimes we do see clients opting to have us quote out circuits directly from carriers in their region, but then the SASE managed service provider can take over the management of those circuits. So you're still having one point of contact. You might have separate bills each month, but you still have one point of contact for management. So that's another kind of strategy that we've seen as well.
And I think it's also interesting, some of the SASE providers have also built a version of that into their platform. So I think when you think about like network management, I think about like Cato's last mile monitoring that they have inside of their platform. And it allows the customer to kind of be that organization that does the last mile monitoring. So it allows you to really have a good monitoring capability of your public WAN access, better than just kind of up down status.
Yeah, agreed. I think Command Link did that really well, creating their own kind of SaaS platform to help manage everything across the WAN, or including even UCAS or the telephony solution. That was pretty cool. And then oh, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say the biggest thing is the network security side of things. I mean, I think that's why everybody is having the conversation around SASE right now is really the network security side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would agree. It's definitely more relevant now, I think, even with the hybrid workforce, like we mentioned before, because if you've got people working from home and they're connecting in with a legacy VPN concentrator type solution, now you're having to home back to the same data center every time. Whereas with SASE, these network security services are brought closer to your workforce. So whether I'm sitting where I'm at right now, close to Vancouver, I could connect to the Vancouver POP, but if I travel over to Europe or something for the week, I can connect to the London POP or the Paris POP or wherever I'm at and access all of these services. So like I mentioned before, Secure Web Gateway, ZTNA, Cloud Access Security Broker, those are the ones that are kind of, and Firewall as a service, but sometimes Firewall as a service is kind of lumped in with Secure Web Gateway. But those are kind of the mandatory security services that Gartner has said you have to include these in your solution if you want to be on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So everyone that we saw on the previous slide for the Gartner Magic Quadrant includes these in their platform.
And fun fact, I think Sarah takes advantage of that feature set the most because I believe, Sarah, you like I've heard you like to travel and just work remotely from places that you travel. I think the last time I talked to you, you were I think in South America somewhere, I thought.
I actually have not been to South America yet, but I usually work from Europe. Somewhere over there, I'm sure.
Maybe I'm misthinking, or maybe it was Mexico or somewhere like that then.
All good, all good.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked about Secure Web Gateway, the zero trust networking and things like that. Maybe we want to get into a little bit more of what those types of things mean. I know, again, a couple of months ago, I talked with actually Rick on a similar webcast that I did and kind of demystifying the alphabet soup of kind of security. And a lot of these things, I think it is like an alphabet soup. People just throw acronyms at us. It's, CASB, SWG, VPNA, ZTNA. So, I mean, maybe we want to dig into what those things mean a little bit more. I see DLP is in under CASB, and I was going to talk about that in the last slide as well. But do you kind of want to talk through what some of these things mean at a deeper level rather than just the acronyms or the names of the services being out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Secure Web Gateway and Firewall, I mentioned before, kind of get lumped together sometimes by these vendors. They'll kind of be on the same line item. Basically, they're both protecting your traffic to the internet. And that's why they kind of get lumped together sometimes. Firewall more so refers to the premise-based firewalls, and then there's firewall as a service, which would be the cloud-based firewalls, and then Secure Web Gateway is also cloud-based, so that's why there's some nuance there, but essentially it filters your internet traffic and keeps that kind of traffic safe. Then we're looking at CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, which gives you a lot more granular control over access to cloud-based applications specifically. So CASB is a feature that's kind of made up of different features like data loss prevention, authentication, tokenization, things like that, to make sure that you are who you say you are and you have access to this cloud application and you can access that. So that's where CASB comes in is cloud applications, whether it's SaaS or public cloud. And then ZTNA is probably the one that I talk about the most, Zero Trust Network Access. That one is kind of, I describe it as a next-gen VPN, whereas, when you have a legacy VPN solution and you're deploying VPN concentrators into data centers or headquarters or wherever they're at, you have those VPN concentrators for your users to connect into. And the example I just gave, right? I could have a VPN concentrator in Vancouver. My company certainly wouldn't, because I'm one of like 3 people up here. So I'd probably be connecting into Arizona or Chicago, and that connection might be fine on a daily basis. But what happens when I want to work remotely from Europe? Now all my traffic is hairpinning back to Arizona or Chicago, and I'm having a very poor experience with that. And I probably just wouldn't work remotely from Europe. I probably wouldn't have the flexibility to do that. So ZTNA on the access side, on the network optimization side, really gives employees the flexibility to be able to work from wherever, whether that is for work or for personal reasons. And then on the security side, the zero trust side of it, is that you're not giving access to anything they don't need access to. So I'm on the engineering team. I don't need access to marketing or finance or anything else within the company. So I don't have access to that. Because God forbid someone gets my credentials and they can log in as me. Now they don't have access to the entire company. They just have access to one section of it, and we need to mitigate that. But that's kind of where that zero trust portion of that comes in.
Yeah. Sarah, do you see people utilizing SASE today to help lower their footprint to the greater public internet? Like, as we have seen more and more SaaS applications. So now we've got things like ServiceNow and Salesforce and Office 365. I've seen a growing trend where people want to minimize that public footprint. So they really do utilize that kind of mentality of, now the firewall is further back, a step back in the cloud. And so, they're restricting access to those applications publicly unless you're coming from one of those POP locations, to really secure down kind of what's available publicly in the footprint for an organization. That's kind of certainly at the hyper secure level, but I'm having more and more conversations about things like that. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, every once in a while, we'll get someone who wants the most secure network that they possibly can, and they don't care how much it costs, that type of conversation. And that's when I think that comes up the most is, we want to make sure that everything our users are accessing is going through the POP, is going through the firewall, the secure gateway, the CASB solution. And yes, if you can push it back further, technically it is closer to those cloud-based applications. And you're getting, if you're connecting from a branch site, you're getting that SD-WAN optimization from the branch to the POP as well. So yeah, I could definitely see that, being a trend.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm seeing a lot of is, from a security perspective, I think the most common fix for VPN. So you talked about hairpinning traffic and things like that. So what I see is, in order to almost like a trade-off, so they want the end user to have a decent experience. So what do they start doing? They start saying, well, you only need to turn the VPN on when you need to connect to a resource locally. That's a security hole in my opinion. And then they'll start to say things like, okay, well, you know what? We don't want their internet traffic to be slow because, they have to hairpin that traffic back through one of the concentrators. So they'll split tunnel it. So anything bound for 8443, totally allowed to go out their local connection, everything else route through the VPN. And again, those just provide more and more security loopholes to be exploited. So I've been seeing a lot more with some of these SASE solutions where that always on VPN gives either the security team or the network team kind of a greater peace of mind, because now a lot of them, the minute that laptop is flipped open, turned on, and connects to the internet, it's now running essentially through a firewall with the same rules that they would have if they were sitting in an office. And it really does give them that peace of mind.
Yeah, I think that if you give users the ability to turn on and off that VPN, that's a security risk in and of itself, like you mentioned, because you can't rely on them opening up their laptop and turning that on every day. It needs to automatically happen. And even if you have, like you're describing the client-based ZTNA platform as well, like where you're downloading the client onto your laptop, and then every time you open it to use it, it turns on. A lot of these solutions also have browser-based options. If you have a temporary employee or the contractor or something along those lines, to where they can access, you can restrict their access just like you can a regular employee, but they can have access to what they need access to for that temporary amount of time without having to download that client onto the laptop. You just get more granular visibility and control if you have that client-based one. So that's what we usually see for permanent employees, but there are other options for temporary employees as well.
Yeah. And then I think one of the things that we probably haven't touched on, but is, and kind of on the fringe cases of this, but all of these platforms are going to interact with some of the biggest, the login management or anything like that. So think like the Oktas of the world, the OAuth, the Jump Clouds, Microsoft's, authentication method. Most of these guys have integrations with all of those platforms to even further secure the log on attempts into these platforms. And then I also think, to take it into another security element, most of these vendors all support integration with most of the big name SIEM solutions that are out there so that they can ingest that network traffic information into whatever they're utilizing to manage those logs and review for security alerts.
Yep. Agreed.
So I know we already touched on this, but the components that must be included in SASE, I think we hit on this in that other slide, but certainly it's that secure web gateway, the cloud access, ZTNA, SD-WAN, firewall, and centralized management. And those are those items that, as Sarah stated, were outlined by Gartner to be part of the SASE solution.
Yep. And the last one that's probably not on there, well, it kind of is. It has to be cloud-based. There needs to be a cloud component of it, which is likely why I put this cloud there when I made the slide. But they have to have a cloud-based solution. So I'm sure we'll get into the different architectures in a minute here, but the edge-based options are not going to be included as SASE solutions.
Yep. So I that's a great segue. So let's start with these models here. So this is the edge-based model, which I would guess is probably what most users are familiar with because it's Fortinet, it's Meraki, it's Versa, it's what everybody's used to when they say they have SD-WAN or SASE with devices at every location. I think it's probably the most predominant solution.
Yep, exactly. These are, you've got your edge devices deployed at HQ, data centers, branch sites, wherever you've got presence, and they have, full SD-WAN benefits between site to site because it needs to have a bookended solution. So you've got site A and site B, you have dynamic path selection between the two, forward error correction, packet duplication, whatever that SD-WAN solution comes with. You've got that from site to site, but when you're connecting to cloud or SaaS-based applications or the public internet, there's no bookended device up in the cloud there. So the best that it can do is QoS at the edge. So I can prioritize, this Teams meeting over Salesforce or Outlook or anything else that's not real time, but I can't have control over that traffic once it leaves the edge. So that's the downside that we see there. But for clients who are still using or continue to use, premise-based applications in the data center or something, this could be useful for them if they're not, moving to the cloud. But and with public cloud, I should also mention that you can virtualize a lot of these options into, AWS, Azure, GCP. So it can almost become another site on your WAN. But if we're getting into more SaaS applications or, connecting to the internet for critical traffic, then we're moving toward the gateway or the POP model.
Yeah, so I mean, you just said about it. So let's go to kind of the next logical step, which would be that gateway model.
Sure. So you still have edge devices at every site, just like in the last edge model option. But here we've got these gateways that are hosted globally for the most part. And these gateways, an easy way to describe them is kind of like large multi-tenanted SD-WAN devices. Now, a lot of them house security components as well. So these gateways can be used for remote or traveling employees to connect into and then go out to the public internet, like we just mentioned with ZTNA and other security platforms hosted there. But you can still connect to them from the devices at your branch sites, and that's where you get that SD-WAN functionality because, again, it needs to be bookended. So if I'm a remote user connecting into the gateway, I don't necessarily need or have the SD-WAN component, but I have the security components. And here, that gateway again acts as a bookended solution. So you have SD-WAN from your site to the gateway, and then it's a short hop on the public internet over to whichever application you're trying to access. I think the most popular version of this is VeloCloud, VMware VeloCloud, Broadcom VMware VeloCloud, whatever we're calling it these days. But they've been doing this gateway model for quite some time, and then Versa recently built out gateways that they can now utilize as well as Netscope.
And then the third option that I think we've probably touched on the most, because we've used one of the biggest vendors' names in this throughout the beginning of the presentation here, is Cato. So this is this would be the POP-based model. I apologize, there's actually a typo in here. So this is the POP-based model, as you can see by the POPs on the private backbone.
Yep. So the main difference here is that private backbone. These POPs, they act similarly to the gateways, where you can now prioritize, or sorry, you can now optimize cloud-based and SaaS-based applications from them by having those SD-WAN benefits from site to POP. So it works the same way in that way, but now you have this private backbone that connects all these POPs, which can be really good for long-haul traffic, right? If you've got a user sitting in Europe trying to access an application that's hosted in the US, and they have a lot of distance between them, that private backbone is almost like a private highway to get them over to the US with as least amount of latency as possible. It's also a really good use case for getting traffic in and out of mainland China, because you've got the Great Firewall of China, and in order to get around that, we need a private connection. So this private backbone can do that as long as the provider has a POP in mainland China. They probably also have one in Hong Kong or Singapore or somewhere around there, and then they can get the traffic to that Hong Kong or Singapore POP and then to wherever it needs to go from there. So that private backbone is really useful. You do end up paying more for it. It is an extra charge to use the private backbone. So not every piece of traffic needs to go over it, right? Like, some traffic can simply go to the POP and then out to the public internet, and that way you're not paying for that usage. But for the traffic that will benefit from it, it definitely helps.
Yeah, and I think there's there's been some recent developments with some of these guys. I think Cato and Ariaka specifically. I know Cato's definitely for sure, but even the development of, there's certain traffic that now you can peel off and not send it up to the cloud at all. So think of things like backup traffic, potentially, a site-to-site connection that we know does not need to be sent up to the POP and back down for review. I think another really neat feature of this POP-based model is, as well, I would call it like a firewall between layer 2 VLANs, but some of these solutions can send traffic from one local layer 2 VLAN up to the POP for inspection. So all that same functionality that you're looking at for your traffic entering and leaving the infrastructure, it can do that for inter VLAN communication, and it can be turned on per inter VLAN. I've seen use cases where what made sense was to do that for maybe a IoT network that was in a manufacturing facility. The secure web gateway client sent external vendors down into the correct VLAN that they needed to be to manage their IoT devices within the manufacturing infrastructure, but also any of the traffic that was bound for other layer 2 networks inside of that infrastructure was initially sent up to the POP for inspection and then back down to whatever other layer 2 it was bound for, just because of the nature of those IoT devices and how they can be somewhat easily compromised or could be on aged hardware.
Yeah, I think it's important what you mentioned before about not all the traffic needs to hit even the POP, right? Not all traffic needs to go over the backbone. Not all traffic even needs to hit that POP if you're sending trusted traffic out. I think that's actually part of the reason why Cato took a step back and put some security functionality at the edge, because they were getting, some of their clients were probably a little bit frustrated that everything had to go to the POP or just not have security wrapped around it. So yeah, it's definitely a trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, so we've talked about kind of the models, we've talked about the solution and the components of the solution. So maybe let's get into some of like the perfect use cases or perfect scenarios for SASE. I know you and I had talked about a handful of success cases that we've seen, or maybe indicators to customers as to when it's time to look at one of these solutions. We talked about a couple of scenarios. This is the first scenario. Let's just talk through these scenarios and kind of so that customers on the call understand what a good scenario for SASE looks like.
Sure. So this one is all about moving to cloud and SaaS based applications. And this is more so about the optimization of these applications where, you might have had prem-based apps and edge-based SD-WAN in the past, and that was fine because you can have that bookended solution at the data center where those applications are hosted and they're completely optimized. But when you're moving to SaaS like UCaaS or CCaaS, unified communications being a hosted telephony solution, or contact center as a service, a hosted contact center solution, or O365, Salesforce, any of these platforms are likely critical to the business and need to be optimized as much as possible. So with that, the gateway or the POP-based SD-WAN or SASE solutions are going to be the best bet for that because, like we talked through, they have that bookended solution in the cloud, and now we can use dynamic path selection is going to be a big one here, but also forward error correction, packet duplication, etc., from your branch sites to the cloud, and then connect to whichever application you're trying to access. So this is a big one specifically for the optimization of these new, cloud or SaaS-based applications.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely see a good use case with this in terms of a lot of customers maybe move a component of their infrastructure, all their infrastructure to one of these public or private cloud providers, and they still struggle with performance to those to that infrastructure. And this is a really good way to supplement that and make that an easy transition and make that make that cloud first initiative go even better, even smoother. The latency is lower to those cloud first type of initiatives.
Yeah, and actually specifically with those public cloud environments, I mentioned this earlier, but you can virtualize almost any SD-WAN solution, especially the edge-based ones, into Azure, AWS, GCP. So it's almost like another site on your WAN when you're looking at it from an analytics perspective. But the other option is to go with a provider like Cato or Ariaka, and they actually have private connections into these public cloud environments stemming from their POPs. So that's just another option to be able to optimize and secure these your traffic to these environments as well.
Yeah. And then we have a second scenario, which looks like a replacement of a lot of infrastructure. I think somebody's coming up on their 5 to 7 year replacement cycle with this second scenario.
Yeah, honestly, rarely do we get everyone trying to replace all of these at one time. That would be great, right? If all of your contracts ended on the exact same date, that's kind of a unicorn. But we do get clients coming to us sometimes saying, my firewall is going end of life. I'm looking for new quotes for circuits, or there's just a few things within the network that needs replacing, or they just want to see what else is out there and kind of educate themselves on the newer technologies since the 5 years ago that they took a look at this stuff. And when we're chatting about what exactly they're looking for and what their environment looks like, sometimes it's helpful to kind of take a step back and be like, oh, you have Fortinet firewalls today that you're using for a VPN for your remote users. Might they benefit from a ZTNA solution? Or might we benefit from a cloud-based firewall for that matter, if mostly what you're accessing is cloud-based or SaaS-based apps. So it's kind of we kind of have to understand exactly what our clients are talking about and what they're trying to get to moving forward. And that's why we have a lot of, just strategy calls and not necessarily, oh, you want this? Okay, we'll bring you this and we'll give you this quote. We like to have more deeper conversations around these situations to see if we can find a better solution for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely think between the replacement of private network and the replacement of maybe your firewall solution, those I tend to see come up at the same time. Either it's because potentially the customer was getting something like EVPL or MPLS, and also was maybe getting firewall as a service from that same vendor, and so the time has come that both of those are coming out of contract, or they've just timed it correctly that they bought these upgraded connections and they're ready to they bought the appropriate hardware. I think that's something to mention that maybe didn't get mentioned as I'm talking through that with the appropriate hardware. So many of these POP-based solutions understand that they scale. So like the classic idea of I have 100 people in my office and I bought a firewall that can service 100 people at X amount of megabits per second of throughput. That kind of concept goes out the window with many of these SASE providers because that computation's being done at a cloud-based level. So, it's not a conversation of we added 50 people to an office and now we need a bigger firewall mid replacement cycle.
Yeah, exactly. You now just go into the portal and add another user, and they can start using the cloud-based security on their first day. And that's assuming that we're using the ZTNA / remote user situation. But if you've upgraded your bandwidth, you might need a larger SD-WAN device at your site. But for the most part, yeah, if you're just adding users every once in a while, and then needing to add them into the network and get them a secure connection, then it becomes a lot easier.
So we have a third scenario here.
Yep. And this one is my favorite personally because it's what allows me to live out what I consider to be my dream life, where I can, work wherever I want to. As Chris mentioned before, sometimes I am not at my house like I am right now when we get on the phone and chat. But this is essentially what we kind of already talked through with remote users and the hybrid workforce, where we need to make sure that they're having a secure and efficient connection to keep employees happy. That's the efficient part, I think, and to keep them productive, but also keep their connection secure, whether they're connecting in from their house, the office, or a Starbucks. And SASE can help do that. One thing that I also wanted to mention here, aside from the VPN, the legacy VPN concentrator versus ZTNA solution, that is probably one of the most profound advancements that I think came from SASE, is the VPN to ZTNA pipeline there. But one thing I did want to mention is that we talked in the beginning about SASE being a framework, not necessarily a point solution. Just because Gartner said these 4 features must be included in your SASE solution to be in our Magic Quadrant doesn't mean you need to go out there and buy those 4 features. If you don't need SD-WAN because you don't have a lot of branch sites, don't buy SD-WAN. If you don't necessarily need CASB or Secure Web Gateway right now, we don't need to add that into the quote, right? A lot of times we do start with ZTNA almost as a standalone product, and then we do have vendors that can sell that standalone without anything else, and that at least allows users to connect in securely. And then later on we can add in the CASB solution or the Secure Web Gateway solution. And what's really cool about a lot of these platforms, Cato specifically stands out because I recently saw a demo of their portal. It's literally a toggle that you click to turn on the CASB or the Secure Web Gateway. It's very, very simple. And then obviously it gets added to your bill for that month, but it's not hard to manage in any way, shape, or form. But I did want to mention that. And then the other scenario that we see here is that sometimes we get clients who are coming to us and they say, okay, I have a headquarters site with, let's say, 300 people at, and then I have little branch sites that might have 3 to 7 people at each site. And for those scenarios, we take a step back and we say, okay, it makes sense to have an SD-WAN device at your headquarters site. If you've got 300 people there, you've likely got quite a bit of bandwidth, and we want to optimize that traffic. So we'll put an SD-WAN device there. And again, that SD-WAN device is likely gateway or POP-based SD-WAN. So that'll get you to the gateway or POP. And that's where the security will be hosted. However, it might not make as much sense to deploy those SD-WAN devices at each of those tiny branch sites, right? We could technically treat the users at those branch sites as if they were remote users and have them connect in over ZTNA and then access the security functionality from there. So that's just kind of, again, those strategy sessions that we like to have to make sure, we're getting you guys the best network that we possibly can, and doing so in accordance to the budget that you have, and also making sure that your users are taken care of in terms of their efficiency and security when connecting into the network. But yeah, those are just a couple of scenarios that I've seen when it comes to remote users.
Yeah. And Sarah, I think I don't know if you've been seeing this as well. One of the things that I've been seeing, and I don't know if any of the customers have started to experience this on the call today, but I've seen a big shift where a lot of cyber liability is now more calling for that ZTNA than the classic VPN style. They want something that's always going to be on. They want something that's always split tunneled. They want something that is either going to hairpin all the traffic, or in the kind of SASE model or the SWG model, wouldn't hairpin that traffic because it would be POP based then at that point. But we're definitely seeing a bigger switch to the insurance side of this business driving some of that.
Yep. Yep. I could definitely see that.
And then I think we have one last scenario that we discussed, which is the visibility into the infrastructure.
Yep. So this comes in the form of a portal that you can log into as a user of SASE. Not everyone will have access. It's typically an admin portal, but when you log into these, they mostly all have some sort of map view of all of your sites, and you can see, how your network is doing, whether it'll usually be green, yellow, or red, depending on the amount of latency, jitter, et cetera, that those circuits are seeing. And you have that data to then be able to go and let the carrier know what's going on, if that's on you, or your managed service provider might already be doing that for you if it's in the red. And then you also have that increased security or the increased visibility around the security side for everyone, so you can see where they're physically located at. Not that I'd necessarily want everyone to see where I'm at. If they see I'm in Europe, then I get some questions. But if you could see where they're at, if they're in the office, if they're at home, or if they are traveling, and then you can see who accessed which applications at which time. You just have a lot more visibility into the network and what's going on, whether you need to make sure employees are actually doing their job, or you need to take that data back to like I said, the carrier or anyone else who you're working with to show them that this is actually an issue, and kind of stop the finger pointing that we see quite a bit in that space.
Yeah. So I know we're getting close to the end of time here. We have about 10 minutes, but we've talked about a handful of vendors. So this next slide, kind of who can help out with this. This is almost a who's who of everybody that we've talked about on here, with the exception of Palo being duplicated here twice. But is there any organizations that really stand out on this for you, Sarah?
Yeah, definitely. Cato, obviously, we've talked about them quite a bit during this session, but Cato, like I mentioned before, is probably the first vendor who was offering SASE before it became known as SASE. And so they are, one of the largest players in this space. And we also have managed service providers who can offer Cato, as well as circuit aggregation and management over everything, because Cato inherently they do some last mile management for circuits, but they don't aggregate circuits. So if you wanted everything from one provider, then we'd have to go to an MSP. We have plenty of them in our portfolio. Fortinet is interesting to me right now. Fortinet I see it as 3 different SASE offerings, and I use quotations because one of them isn't technically SASE. It's the edge-based FortiGates, right? Your standard firewall and SD-WAN devices that you can deploy to every site. And I wouldn't necessarily call that SASE, but that is, their traditional Fortinet FortiGate offering. And then we have providers like Masergy Comcast, who I mentioned earlier, where they've deployed their own POP-based Fortinet solution. And we have a couple others. GTT did the same thing, where they are now offering POP-based Fortinet. It's those FortiGate solutions still, but it's the provider's own network backbone, and they've been offering that for quite some time. More recently, we were introduced to FortiSASE, which is Fortinet's version of that POP-based Fortinet solution that these vendors have been offering for a little while. So FortiSASE has, POPs globally, and they've got all of the security functionality at the POPs. My only issue with them right now is that when you deploy FortiSASE, you inherently get access to 4 Fortinet POPs, which isn't very many, unfortunately. Like Cato, for instance, just for comparison, Cato has, I think, 90 plus POPs globally at this point, and if you deploy it, you get access to every single one of them. So if you have traveling employees, they can use any one of them.
I think Cato has 4 just in the Northeast.
Right. Yeah. And they're adding more and more every time I talk to them.
Interesting that you talk about that. I have a customer that was looking at the FortiSASE solution. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. It depends on where your people are located. But currently, FortiSASE has a giant black hole over the Middle East. So if you have any sort of traffic that has to run through the Middle East in any capacity, they're probably connecting back through Europe.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, inherently, I think that even the 4 POP rule needs to change before we deploy them as much as we are, Cato or others. But a couple others I wanted to mention. Palo Alto is obviously a big name in this space. They have been very strong in security, and then they acquired CloudGenix SD-WAN years ago and have it integrated into their platform now. Palo Alto does tend to be a little bit pricier than other options, but in the enterprise space, they are doing very, very well. Cloudflare, I mentioned them earlier. They are very strong also in the security side, a little lighter in the SD-WAN, but they are, SD-WAN is a newer feature for them. So I imagine that they will get up to speed with the other vendors in this space. But for the security side, they are a very, very good provider. And then Open Systems is one more that I will mention, where they used to be actually edge-based only. So it used to not necessarily be considered SASE, but now they're deploying POPs globally, and they are also very flexible when it comes to customers who have locations where they don't have POPs today. They will deploy them for certain customers and kind of make a custom solution that way. So white glove management, and if you want a vendor who can kind of take over management of everything and be a partner in that space, then Open Systems is really good at that.
Definitely. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions from the group, or if anybody has anything outstanding for myself or Sarah. I was emailed a question by a customer earlier this week that wasn't able to attend, Sarah, so maybe we can just touch on this real quick. Sure. Somebody had asked me the ability to detect when a user is on-prem versus off-prem. When a user is off-prem or remote, the desire is for the user traffic to be pathed via the nearest SASE POP and utilize all the SASE functions. That's the easy part. If a user is on-prem, using a SASE POP may be suboptimal / redundant depending on the on-premise infrastructure and topology and use case. Has anyone, to your knowledge, been able to resolve this kind of on-prem versus off-prem setup?
So they're saying that when you're at the office, there's not a big benefit to them to hit the SASE POP.
Correct.
Yeah, and split tunneling can help with that, right? Like we talked about, internet traffic can go out directly from the edge device in most scenarios. I will say not every vendor allows that, but in most scenarios. And I'd be curious though, do you know where that customers' applications are hosted? Are they using SaaS apps, or is everything on-prem?
I think they're mostly data center, like colo located hardware and data centers.
Yeah, I mean they could just use the site-to-site SD-WAN and security in the device for that type of scenario. That's what we see sometimes. Sometimes we'll even see clients having a separate solution. I don't always recommend it unless you've got, a large IT team that is willing to manage two separate solutions, but you could have, Fortinets at your edge sites, and then at your data center, and use that for site-to-site traffic. And then you could have like a Cato deployed for remote users to connect in. That again would just be two separate portals to manage everything from, but yeah, doable.
Yeah, I've seen that configuration with Zscaler where they use Zscaler for their remote employees, or also Versa's got a new like SWG product that they're really pushing for those remote employees that's POP based. It does it tends to work better when you have Versa back down on site to take that traffic from the remote users in, but
yeah, unfortunately the ideal scenario is not always what ends up happening. And we can, talk about the ideal scenario, but if we've got budget constraints, or if we've got certain technologies already in place that we need to integrate with it, then, sometimes it's kind of out of our hands, and we can work toward that ideal scenario, but it's not always possible. And we try to do the best that we can with what we have.
Definitely. Well, thank you again, Sarah, for all your time and all your additional information. As always, as part of all these conversations that we have on a monthly basis, if you want to have a deeper conversation with myself or Sarah, and you want to get into some of these vendors, have conversations with them, please, as always, reach out to your technology advisor. Would love to facilitate those conversations. Would love to talk deeper about, success criteria, the different scenarios that might fit, the models that might fit your organization. More than happy to have those conversations. And also, if you want to dig into this and learn any more, please, we're going to post the recording on LinkedIn, but we'll also link to Sarah's blog, Getting Sassy with Sarah, as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Hope everybody has a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.